Hello and welcome to today's presentation and virtual workshop of NGINX 101 for state and local government with One Technology and NGINX, a division of F5 Networks. My name is Matt Marlier with NGINX, and I'll be your moderator today. All the participants are muted. Please use the chat feature to get my attention or any other presenter's attention. I will be directing those. When we get to the workshop portion, we'll be using an environment called UDF. You should have received an invite to join UDF. If you have not received that yet, please use the chat feature to send me your email so I can make sure to send you an invite again. And I'll repeat those instructions when we get to the workshop section. Today you'll be hearing from Matt Brown from One Technology and Jesse Goodyear from NGINX, part of F5. And I'll now turn it over to our first speaker, Matt Brown. Take it away, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Really just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's joined and participating today. Most of you are One Technology customers. We appreciate it. We look forward to helping you through your DevOps journey. We've got a series of other webinars that are coming down the pipe that are directed exclusively at state, local, and education end users that are complementary to this. Yeah, sit back and enjoy this one. Get ready to get your hands dirty with the NGINX workshop. And yeah, thank you to everyone for joining. And with that, Jesse Goodyear.
Thank you, Matt. And with that, I will get started. Thank you all for joining. My name is Jesse Goodyear, as everyone just mentioned, so I won't skip the introductions here. Let's give you an overview of the agenda today. We're going to start high level with kind of a history of NGINX and then discuss the F5 solutions as a whole and where everything fits now that we're one company. And then we'll try to spend as little time on the presentation as possible and go into a demo of what's called NGINX Controller and an overview of the hands-on portion of this workshop. So without further ado, let me start by asking Matt if we want to launch the poll for where everyone is with their NGINX experience. And there's obviously no right answer here. And I'll keep talking while you answer that poll.
So Jesse, the first poll is actually the, we don't have the NGINX experience poll.
Okay, well, skip that. We're just gonna assume it's an even balance of really good, new and lots of experience. So good enough. There's a cool poll later on. I assure you that will work. Okay, so just a little history on NGINX. The software, the open source project, was first released in 2004 as a solution, or at least potential solution, to the C10K problem, which was the problem that no web server at the time could handle 10,000 concurrent connections. And our founder was working at basically a version of Yahoo at the time. And every time they had growth in user base, they had to buy more physical servers, and that got expensive. So we went out to solve that problem, and we're here today because he did such a great job at that. After 2004, the adoption of NGINX kept growing. So NGINX Inc. was founded in order to help support the customer base. The first product released was NGINX Plus, which is basically a enterprise solution built on top of NGINX open source that is closed in terms of you need a subscription in order to download it. Developer licenses are available on top of evals. Just to give kick the tires, we will also have available after this presentation the ability to get a 1-year developer license. And so, or subscription, I should probably call it. Stay tuned for that. I'll talk in much more depth about NGINX Plus in a minute. We're also going to focus a lot of time on NGINX controller, which is the control plane of NGINX. It gives you visibility and the ability to use a GUI to configure your instances, and a couple cool things on top of that. I got acquired last year by F5 and most recently released version 21 of NGINX Plus, and NGINX controller that we're using today was released about 3 weeks ago, and we should have another release next week or two. So that's the history, kind of give a picture of the NGINX solutions as they are today. NGINX control plane at the top, as I just described. A lot of people will probably initially understood NGINX as a web server, and it is, absolutely. A little over 40% of all deployments of NGINX, though, are as these other things listed in this chart, being load balancer, CDN replacement, API gateways, and we just released our most recent product, which is NGINX App Protect, which is a web application firewall. We have had solutions in the past focus on mod security. They're still supported by NGINX today, but we're obviously very excited to have the new App Protect solution in the portfolio. And I'll get into that one a little bit. NGINX Unit is a polyglot application server, supports multiple programming languages concurrently. It's a modern app server in that it's deployed via CI/CD pipelines. It's got a great API into it, and also very lightweight. NGINX itself, NGINX Plus, NGINX open source are both very, very small in terms of their footprint. I want to say deployed is under 100 meg for either one. And so when you're running on a Docker container or a 64 core Dell server, it is both scalable and efficient, right? So it's a tiny application when it needs to be, and it can be humongous. You know, it can help scale with the biggest of websites out there, which is this slide, right? So Netcraft does a scan of the internet to find what web servers are being used, and everything is growing. This is just a market share chart. NGINX took the lead about a year or two ago and hasn't stopped since. So, you know, it's just a testament to how much trust there is for NGINX, the software today. So like I said, NGINX Plus is built on top of NGINX open source, and there's hundreds of millions of websites running it, and there's hundreds of millions of API gateways running it. Okay, so NGINX Plus, I mentioned, unlike other open source solutions out there, like Red Hat, everything that all of their solutions are also available open source. NGINX Plus needs a subscription. It's really for enterprise customers that want, you know, a few features that are listed here software-wise, as well as much better visibility. And so a lot of customers we have are very concerned with east-west traffic between, you know, microservices potentially. And NGINX can give you, you know, more metrics about that traffic than you want, right? Because this is hard to parse through when you're looking at everything that's available. JOT authentication, which is JSON Web Tokens, another huge driver of customers that are using NGINX Plus, right? So they can authenticate the clients coming to the APIs, and there's good reasons for that I'll talk about in a minute. Another big one is our ability to do dynamic reconfigurations without downtime, meaning we can change the members of a upstream load balancer pool without any impact to the amount of processes running or memory usage of the NGINX instance. And when we get to the workshop, we can take a look at that. If you want, let me know. I'll point in the right direction. I did ignore the link down here. I realize you can't click it. I apologize for that. If you go to Google though and type in NGINX Plus Matrix, it will bring up this link, it'll give you a handy chart with clickable links for how to configure each one of those components. So latest from F5, we announced a new product called NGINX App Protect, and it is not replacing anything. For all you aware of ASM, is advanced WAF from F5. That is still, I would say, the most robust solution in our portfolio. App Protect is meant to address a slightly different customer base, where the customer is potentially looking for a very efficient, lightweight web application firewall that can be deployed in a container, for example. So securing east-west traffic between, your backend microservices. Very difficult to do when your virtual edition of F5 is 10 gig, right? And so it's moving traffic north and south in order to hit that WAF, whereas we can put sidecars, as they call them, inside of those microservices to prevent traffic from, make sure traffic meets certain security policies. All of NGINX solutions are really designed to be integrated in your CI/CD pipelines. It being as popular is on the web, clearly it gained adoption for a reason. It's because it's very easy to deploy and maintain. A little bit more on where we see NGINX App Protect fitting in your software architecture. Everywhere there's a little green logo, it's a potential insertion point for that additional layer of security. The only thing that's not available today is this ability to load it on top of the Kubernetes Ingress controller. That will be released in about a month. So very soon to be an accurate slide, and I apologize for a little bit of futures here. And so, like I said earlier, if you want to do more protection for your microservices, or your API gateways, or at the perimeter of the data center, could be NGINX, could be big IP. It really just depends on your particular, business requirements and architecture. This is what we call here at F5 our code to customer application data path. And I like to look at it as the customer to code application data path, but it doesn't work with the marketing people as well. And so the reason why I focus from the customer side, it's easier to understand when they make a request, that request could potentially hit a caching network first, right? Content delivery network. And then do some geo load balancing, denial of service mitigation, potentially perimeter-based, web application firewall, and all the way down to where we have more microservices type stuff. Basically, every environment we've spoken with has a mixture of solutions fitting all of these components within the application delivery path. And this leads to a couple different problems. One, there's a lot of different skill sets that are needed to support every one of these vendors' solutions. And the teams need to coordinate very closely when changes are made to the application, whether that's adding new applications or making revisions to current ones. And then each one of those adds their own overhead, right? And so a lot of places that have adopted NGINX have used it because it is so efficient. It's, real-time processing the requests. And I'll get into the architecture a little bit more later, but we have some of the best C coders in the world, and this thing is purpose-built to deliver applications with as little latency as possible, all while simplifying the stack to this, right? So this is an F5 portfolio that delivers exactly what you saw in the previous slide with those 20-odd vendors. And so there's much less expertise that you need to maintain within your organization when you're doing this. I mean, most enterprises in the world are using a big IP today, so I think this is a common skill set. And most developers today are have used NGINX at some point. So very simple and maintainable skill set, and a very seamless environment for when you need to deploy or maintain your current applications. So I mentioned earlier on the right-hand side here is kind of the perimeter of your data center, whether that's a cloud or on premises. A lot of security functions Big IP is the best at, including denial of service mitigation, SSL offloading, things that you're using Big IP for today, continue to do that. Where NGINX fits in an F5 world is really helping the developers to have their, seamless deployment life cycles. Look at companies like Uber or Lyft that are doing hourly deployments on their microservices in the back end. If you think about traditional NetOps-based change control windows, a lot of them are 1 week or 2 weeks for very good reasons, right? We need to maintain perimeter security, and we need a reliable network. Whereas the developers probably have different needs. We need to get our application delivered as quickly as possible because we need to be able to compete in the digital economy. And I don't like dropping marketing terms, but I think that those are, accurate statements. To give you kind of a feel for what this is on the back end, you just pretend this doesn't say Ingress controller for a second. Let's just say this is the main website for your application. I like to bring up a bank because people are familiar with logging on to, CapitalOne.com or Chase.com, and then they see their, current balance, the list of statements in another corner of the website. Another corner will have, potentially different credit cards that they think you might want to apply for, even though you already have one. All right, so each one of those components of the website is a microservice, and these boxes in the back end here are what that represents. And there could be multiple. So this, let's just say we're looking at the current balance as a potential microservice. There would be, potentially 5 or so, upstream web servers responding to those requests. And this NGINX Plus instance is directing the traffic to the one that's responding the fastest. And so that's what this architecture is all about. I want to talk a little more about Kubernetes in a minute, but this could easily, very commonly in a Kubernetes environment would be an NGINX Ingress controller, and we'll talk about the differences between the flavors out there. I mentioned the term API many times now, so let's just give it a little definition. In my point of view, any machine talking to another machine, it's using an API call to request that data, right? So it's not an API call when a user hits a web browser and goes to chase.com, right? That's just user traffic. An API being when that main website wants to populate all of those quadrants on its main frame, it's hitting all those microservices and calling APIs in order to get the data. Another example of where Google Maps is used and why the security of their APIs is so important, because they're making a ton of money with this, is think about a company like Marriott, where you want to stay in Manhattan, and we want to pick a specific hotel on the map and be able to click it and view its properties, right? And so all of that is being done by an API call into Google Maps in order to retrieve the picture of the map and the data points. We're going to look at API management a little bit as well here. So on the left here, you have basically what I would say is every other API management solution in the market. And then on the right is NGINX perspective on the best way to manage APIs. So we'll start with the traditional API management method, where you've got this request from the main website. It hits a control plane that makes decisions based on what those request is about, make sure it's secured. And then it hits the data plane in order to find the upstream server and then send the response back, potentially format the data, and the client gets the response. All these squiggly lines represent latency that's being added to that API call. And we're talking about millions and millions of calls per hour. All all this latency adds up and, impacts end user experience with the application. NGINX, being efficient and scalable, we look at it differently. So we decouple the control plane from the data plane, and the control plane still sends the current version of the route definitions to the data plane, but it's out of path. And so this data plane is making those very fast decisions based on whatever the request is, header, location, cookies, whatever have you, finding the fastest responding web server down here and returning it back to the client. So super efficient and very, very scalable. And I do mean scalable down to very small environments where it's potentially serving, hundreds of requests a minute versus maybe millions of requests a minute, right? We can do it all. So I'm going to stop on API discussion for a second. And Matt, if you want to launch the poll and maybe describe what.
All righty. Here we go. The first poll that we're going to have has to do with, it's going to be a set of 2 questions in regards to your usage or where you're at in regards to Kubernetes. So stand by. You should all see a poll now. I'll leave it up for 60 seconds or until we have a plurality of respondees, and then I will share the results back. So if you would please enter your choices in the poll. Wonderful. About 7 of you have responded so far. Thank you. Let me do a quick count of. Okay, we basically got a plurality of everybody in now. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, I will share that back with everyone now. Jesse and attendees, take a look at this.
Thanks, Matt. That's really helpful. So we'll start really high level on what the Kubernetes Ingress controller is, and hopefully clear up some of maybe answer some questions as to what that is to begin with. And then based on your initial responses, the second poll may not be that interesting. Well, it may be interesting, but the data will probably be obvious. Matt, you want to launch that one now?
Sure thing. Here comes the second. This is related to those of you that responded yes. There were 1 of you in regards to production, 1 in regards to testing. Which platforms are you using? Take a look at this poll, please.
And just to give kind of a couple of anecdotes around these poll questions. So Matt and I are responsible for all NGINX partners in the Americas. And so when you look at the West Coast of the United States, there's quite a bit of Kubernetes in production. As you move towards the mountains in Midwest, much less Kubernetes in production. And as you get closer to like New York City and Boston, there's a handful again. So I think that's a really good perspective. Thank you all for filling in your votes here. And what we're showing here, let me just give GKE is Google's Kubernetes managed environment. EKS is Elastic Kubernetes service from Amazon. AKS is Azure's Kubernetes service. So, and OpenShift is from Red Hat. We see kind of a mixture of everything. Kubernetes tends to be a complex implementation for a lot of enterprises, and the managed solutions and the partners that manage them, like OneTech, are critical to making you successful in that regard. So again, thanks for the feedback there. So let's start real high level as to what Kubernetes is before we talk about why you might need an Ingress controller for it. Okay, so kind of flipped the chart around that we were talking about earlier. So now we have the customer to code data path, and I'll just give an example of another industry here. So if you look at retail, Macy's.com or anything that may have made Amazon because they already own AWS. But any retailer, Target, that's got a lot of traffic that they need to plan for Black Friday, for example, or even Thanksgiving night, because apparently Black Friday is moving up and up every single year, right? So they need to maintain a lot of this infrastructure to handle that load and break even that week, hopefully, right? Versus the day after Christmas, not a lot of people doing shopping. So in order to orchestrate that infrastructure, Kubernetes kind of stepped into the game. And we'll talk, Docker is basically a way to deploy stateless application servers. And Kubernetes is the thing managing all of those deployments. And like I said, when there's a lot of demand, it'll spin up more instances on these pods. And then when there's less, it will spin them down so you don't have to pay for them when they're not in use. With those changes in the number of web servers in the pool, something needs to know what's out there and how to route to it. That thing is called the Kubernetes Ingress controller. Okay, so by default, when you just go to Kubernetes and download the open source version, it will install a Kubernetes Ingress controller based on NGINX. It isn't made by NGINX, the company. It's the community that's around Kubernetes and just taking from the upstream open source that we develop. Well, mostly NGINX, the company, is developing. So anyway, that's where you need an Ingress controller. Let's talk about the differences between the NGINX Community Edition, which let me show you this chart. So this is very confusing, and I apologize, but I didn't come up with the naming conventions. And so if you just downloaded Kubernetes and install it, it will have an NGINX Ingress controller. It is the Kubernetes Community Edition, and it is great for starting development of your Kubernetes-based environments, but then it doesn't have the complete feature set that a lot of enterprises need. Obviously, the visibility that comes along with NGINX Plus isn't available in either the open source edition, which are these, basically first two, and which only in the Plus. The other big one is NGINX maintains a Helm chart repository with various software integrations that are, fully supported by NGINX, the company. And so, yes, a lot of enterprises buy NGINX subscriptions because they want support when something goes wrong, because these are critical environments, often revenue generating, or at least in a state and local government space, critical to maintaining the security of very confidential data for the citizens, whatnot. Especially if you're in DoD, you already get what I'm saying. So on top of that is the need for some of those enterprise class features in terms of potentially web application firewalls, potentially JAWS authentication. So really good information out here. I'm only showing you the first 3 rows of this chart. If you were to go to NGINX Inc. Kubernetes, right? So this is our GitHub repository. This all is published content by NGINX, and it is great, right? So we don't publish anything that doesn't work. If it's still in pre-release, it will say that. If it will say production ready, if it's ready for production. So whenever you see NGINX Inc., you know that it's probably good software. I already talked about NGINX Plus. Here's kind of a repeat of that, so I'm gonna skip this. I'll mention active health checks, I guess. Right? Instead of users finding the first 500 error, we're actively looking at the upstream, pool members to see if they're giving 200 responses versus 500. So take them out of the pool, we get 500s. DNS-based service integration discovery. So you think about, you've got 5 pods in your Kubernetes environment, and you want to add another. You just add another DNS record to point to the new one, and we'll just cache those DNS records as opposed to needing to reconfigure NGINX. Both are common. There's good reasons for everything. So kind of wrap up with the architecture, why NGINX is as scalable and as low latency as it is. This is, and I guess I should mention that NGINX is a binary that you can install with your favorite package manager on your favorite version of Linux. Right? So it's not a appliance per se, right? You've got a Linux instance. You just do a yum install NGINX Plus after you get the certificates, and it will install NGINX onto that box. When you do that, the master process will look at the hardware of that VM, and then spin up a individual worker process for each virtual CPU on that VM by default, I should say. And kind of the process here is that it will read the configuration that's on disk at that moment and hand it off to these worker processes that are then stored in memory. And even with NGINX open source, when you do a reload, which is an NGINX-S reload on the command line, and we can look at that in a minute, and it's a text-based demonstration. When that happens, the master process will then look at the new configuration files on the disk, launch a new set of worker processes per CPU, and they'll have the new config file and serve new connections coming in. And the old workers will stay resident until they're done processing the requests that they had in queue, right? And so we don't have like a hard cutover where we just suddenly remove these workers and everyone's getting, sessions abandoned in their shopping cart, or whatever it is that whatever the application is doing. I'm gonna leave it there. This is meant to be high level. One Technology and I are available anytime to get deep into specific areas of the technology. But this, webinar is trying to just give you a feel for the high level stuff. Before I talk about the terminology, I'm actually gonna jump into a demo. And this is NGINX controller. Let me get back to my start screen here, apologize. So NGINX controller being the control plane for all the NGINX instances in your environment. It is, as you can see, trying to give visibility into the health of that environment here with high level statistics on the entire operation, but you can narrow it down based on tags depending on what you're looking for. We have dashboards specific to particular development teams, if you will, or particular applications if we're looking at production. And those can all be modified very easily just with this GUI. So I can move things around. I can add new graphs, based on whatever instance I'm looking at, and it will add more stuff down here, and then I can move it around. I got a smaller window, so it works for this demo purposes. But if you had a 70-inch screen in your NOC, then these graphs could be nice. One example I don't have up here, but would be to look at errors going on. And so you want to see a low amount of errors. I don't know that everyone cares how many requests per second are coming unless it's 0 or how many. But if you're seeing a lot of 500 errors, you probably want to look into it. Okay, so that's kind of the analytics of the thing. We also have the ability to send out alerts, whether that's via email or a ServiceNow ticket, just say based on, again, too many 500 errors in the course of a minute, send this ticket out. In the platform, we have role-based access control. And so you can give out read-only access to production for all the developers and everyone in IT that's concerned with the performance of those instances serving the application. As well as the ability to segment specific environments by specific application teams. Right? So if you have a microservices-based application, like we were talking about earlier with the banks, the team that's responsible for the lending platform doesn't have access to the retail platform, and vice versa. And so very, very granular controls available there. More plumbing in terms of what, this infrastructure, this management tool lets you do. Now we're looking at the NGINX instances that are registered to this controller. That's done either by running these, shell scripts on your Linux hosts manually. It copies it to the clipboard whenever you click it. So that's pretty easy if you're doing one-off instances. In the workshop we're doing today, we're actually going to use Ansible to deploy your own NGINX instance into the controller. And I'll show you that in a little bit more in a second, but that's the general process for getting an instance into NGINX controller. I don't have any tags defined here, so let me show you that real quickly. And so you can say, this is our, production credit statements. And then we can make that color coded too. When I just randomly clicked pink. Where did that go? Did I not click save? I'm really good at that, so we'll just say test. Oh, no, trust me, I know what I'm doing.
That's all good, Jesse. We trust you.
There we go. Hit enter after you type in your tag, and then hit save. So it's, everything's got its quirks. And once we have the tag there, you can start adding other instances. The tags are designed so that when you're in other parts of the GUI, you can easily find the application or the gateways that you're looking for, right? So it's just a way of categorizing different aspects of the application that are being deployed here. We do have best practice analyzers as well, and that will just give you what our support department believes to be the best practices for how you should configure NGINX. So I'm not going to focus too much on that. It should be pretty straightforward. So let's talk about how you use NGINX controller to configure your application after you have your instances loaded. The first thing is this concept of an application, which is very generic and is intended to be so. So in our world, an application is a container for all the components that make up that application. And going back to our bank example, those are all the microservices that are behind that main web frame. And if we go into one of these, you can see that this is the health of the entire application. And we can go into components and their specific health and what components are potentially slow. You can see we focus a lot on response time and latency in NGINX because it is our big reason why we have a lot of customers adopting the technology. And so we can see if one microservice is responding slowly compared to others, and generally what kind of health there is there. Let's go into add a new component. So this bank, which we call Arcadia, is, I just refresh to make sure that it's still running. Okay. And so you can see kind of your frame here where it's got the main portfolio on the left, and on the right, we have these coming soon boxes. And one of them will be for the ability to refer your friends to this bank, and another one to transfer money. And so these are both microservices that have not yet been deployed. Typically, these would have been deployed and you're just doing a revision to the code, maybe to fix a security vulnerability, maybe because the current version's slow and the developers found the bug and now we're rolling out the new version. Whether that's an hourly push or a nightly push or weekly pushes up your organization, but this can all be done in real time with NGINX without impacting users that are currently on the site. So with that, we're going to add these two microservices to this main site. So we'll go back to the controller. We're going to create a component, and we'll just talk about transfers. And this will be the transfers microservice. That's the name of it. You can fill in the tags and everything else. I'm just going to skip through this in the interest of time. We're going to deploy that to our gateway, which will do the routing of the traffic. It's going to look at the URI. In this case, I believe it's app3. It doesn't matter because we're actually going to deploy this using an API and not via a GUI. I think the GUI is great. Let me get through this real quick. And this is going to be the referral workload group. And it's got an upstream that's, you know, HTTP in this case, 10 dot whatever. Is that legal? Looks it. And done. Once we've done, this is the minimum we've needed to create this microservice, or enable this microservice, I should say. And the reason why I did all of that is so that we could get to this API spec at the bottom. And so if you're looking at this and you're familiar with CI/CD pipelines, you'd be like, that's a lot of clicks in order to automate my application. That doesn't really work with what we're trying to do here. And we agree. This was just a way so that we could give you this JSON payload that you can send to this endpoint in order to create that dynamically. And so generally you would have this in your source code repository. Your new microservice might be on a different IP address, different port, whatever it is. And you would, you know, make that change and push the change through your pipeline, and it would hit production by calling this API. The great thing there is that we continue to have visibility into what's going on in that application with NGINX controller. So I'm going to hit cancel here. We're going to go back to the list of components. You'll see that this is a real demo, and we have our 2 components right now. And I'm going to go to Postman, which for anyone that hasn't used it before is a free and fantastic solution for developing APIs and just generally making API calls and being able to save them so you can use them at a later time, which is what we're going to do right now. Based on our NGINX controller, the first thing you need to do is log in. As everyone does, we always log in as admin because we don't want to, in a demo, make sure we have a permission issue. Once we log in, I'll actually point out that we can just do git on some URIs within NGINX controller, and it will tell us the instances, for example, that are available on that endpoint, and then you can visualize it with Postman. So these are the instances that were available earlier if you happen to catch it. Scrolling down, what we're going to do is we're going to create those additional microservices. So the transfers and the referrals, and you can see I did this earlier, so I did a delete to remove that microservice. What we're going to do right now, though, is a put so we can create the microservice. Very key that you get that right. When we do that, we can go here and see that it is being configured. And I'm also going to do the referrals right now, too. All right, so you can see in this JSON response that both of these are being configured, and when they're done, it will say is configured. If we do a git on that same URI, it won't try to post that same information again. It will just ask, hey, what's there? And you can see it's still configuring. While we're waiting for this to configure, I'll mention the architecture is that once an NGINX instance has a controller agent on it, and that is what's doing the communication. So your individual gateways are polling NGINX controller, asking, hey, do you have a new configuration for me? And sending their metrics up to the controller. That is every minute by default. And so we need to wait in this environment about a minute in order for that to be, for that agent to check in with the controller and then apply the configuration. Let me do another. It's still configuring. Let's go to the GUI. And you can see that those 2 microservices are now added to the GUI. One's configured and one is configuring. And as with these new components, we now have new analytics that will be available as statistics are gathered for it. So now we pray to the demo gods and we hit refresh on our page. And it worked. Okay, so they were coming soon, and now we can refer our friends and transfer money. So that's kind of the high level goal of this workshop today, is we're going to deploy a couple microservices using the GUI in this case, just to make it easier. By all means, you can use Postman. It is possible with the environments that we're giving to you, which, by the way, if you want to go to your email now and make sure you get an email from UDF at F5, which is our universal demo framework. It is a permanent account that you're creating. And so keep the password if you're ever going to do a future workshop with us. That's both F5 and NGINX. It's a really good solution. I mean, I've done a lot of hands-on stuff with other, technologies, and I do like F5 UDF. Let me go into the GUI right now, actually. So if you don't have a login in the chat window, if you could send a message to Matt Marlier or just the hosts, if that's a group, we will send you an email with a link, or we'll have a link sent to your email. Okay, let me show you that UDF system. And so you'll get...
And Jesse, while you're pulling that up, it appears that most of the attendees were on the list that you sent the UDF invite to. Again, per Jesse's comment, any of you who did not get the UDF invite, please please put your email in the chat, direct it to Matt Marlier, and I will submit it. It looks like there are at least 2 attendees that were not on the initial list, Jeff and Amber. So if you're going to do the workshop or want access, Jeff and Amber, please reach out to me, and I will reach out to you via the chat.
Perfect.
Okay, Jesse.
Yeah, no, that's great. So once you log in, you'll get a screen that looks like this, and you'll click Launch and Continue. From there, it isn't obvious, but the couple of things you want first is to open up this workshop guide, which I can do right here. I'll make this bigger, and I'll make that bigger too. I apologize if the text is not that big. And so here is the workshop guide. So if you have a second monitor, it'd be great to put it on that and leave the GUI up in another. I'm going to launch the GUI now. If you go back to the UDF site, you'll see in the top left this deployment, and all the stuff is in the instructions. So if you don't follow along with what I'm doing right now, you'll still be able to get there, and I'm going to be available for the next hour, whatever, to help out if there's any questions. So no stress here. All right, so
so Jesse, there were a couple, just real quick, there were a couple requests for me to resend, so I'm going to fire those off pretty quickly here.
Perfect. And if you don't get an email from us, go to udf.f5.com and hit non-F5 user and reset password, and that should send you another link. So hopefully, if that doesn't work, again, we're here to help. And you don't need it yet, so we got time. Okay, so when you log in and hit deployment, it will start this NGINX Plus instance. Don't worry about the subnet, okay? It's green, it's great. You're on the 10 network, okay? And it's gonna launch an Ubuntu 18.04 NGINX, or excuse me, Linux instance. NGINX is not installed on it yet. That's what we're gonna do. So the next step would be to click on this Access tab, and we're gonna use the web shell, which is this nice black window that logs you in as root. And if I can make that bigger for everyone again, that should be big. All right, and the first step in the instructions will be to rename your instance. I've already done that. The second step is to switch users and then go to that home folder and then change directory into this GitHub repository that is publicly available and will always be available if you wanted to do this in the future. You would need an NGINX controller, which One Technology and NGINX are happy to get you an eval of if you're interested in it. But like I said, all this documentation is publicly available. No, this is too small, so let me just do L. There's a couple of files here that are scripts in order to set up the environment, so you don't have to type a lot of commands or copy and paste a lot of commands as we do in the Linux world. This next command is going to put out way too much text to the size of my screen. Oh no, not too bad. All right, so here's the start of it with this bin bash. It does a git pull to make sure we have the most recent version of this repository, and then install some prerequisites. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of them is install Ansible, and the other one is install the NGINX Inc. Ansible Galaxy playbooks. Okay, so these are required for Ansible to know how to install NGINX and how to install an NGINX controller. And so the next two steps after all those prerequisites are met, the first one is to install NGINX itself. Oops. And this script will take a minute or two. So don't worry if it takes a lot of time. You can watch what it's doing. But basically, Ansible is a tool that's looking at the environment and is going to make that environment look like what we're telling it to. And so it's just making sure, you know, the keys are there, the NGINX version is going to be this, and all that. One of the instructions is to look at the playbook, which, you know what, a better way to look at the playbook is in the documentation on the GitHub. So we go to, where is it? nginxplus.yaml. We can look at what the instructions are. So very, very straightforward playbook. So in general, Ansible can target a group of systems, this potentially in a text file, right? In this case, that's what it is. And then deploys the playbook to the list of systems in that text file. So very, very easy stuff. Never think Ansible's challenging. There's a lot of other challenging stuff like Kubernetes out there. Ansible's super easy. Sometimes getting the formatting correct is challenging, but the software is easy. All right, so that's generally the text-based portion of the workshop. And then you'll be going into NGINX controller. We all have a shared instance, so that's the reason why we're going to rename your instance so that you can identify it when you get to NGINX controller. Within the instructions will be a link to log in to NGINX controller, which is here. And the username and password is right there too. And mine's stored. Thank you, RoboForm. So this is exactly what we saw earlier with that Arcadia Bank application, but we're going to do a much simpler implementation with what we'll call a time API. And just to give you a picture of what it is you're attempting to accomplish in this workshop, very straightforward, is so you want to enable this person to connect to this microservice that returns the time. Generally, well, you don't need HA instances, but you could have them, right? Or you don't even need a load balancer in front of this. You could simply have an NGINX instance. The software architecture, very specific to your environment. Let's talk, about your specific needs. But for the purposes of this workshop, we are simply going to, use this instance to direct all of the traffic. And the first part of it is to send all traffic to resource 1, which we call time 1. And the second one is to send it all to time 2. And then the third one, we configure load balancing to point to the faster responding of the 2. And I put one of these in Singapore and the other one's in the United States. So one of them should be a lot faster than the other. And you can play with the load balancing algorithms to see, which one's better responding. I would say the second part of the workshop with API management is totally optional. We're going to have future workshops, which Matt, if we want to do the so we're wrapping up the end of
Sure.
This
Get
one
the other workshop poll going.
yeah.
All right. We've got another poll here for y'all before you dive into the workshop events. You should see it shortly. It touches on some of the aspects that Jesse took you through, along with some futures, things that we can do with One Technology again on your behalf, if depending on your level of interest. So check your screens. You all should see a poll coming at you now. And I'll leave it up here for a few seconds. Basically, we can go deeper on where NGINX is going as part of the F5 family with application security, what we're referring to as the NGINX App Protect that was recently launched. We've got we can spend much more time on Kubernetes Ingress. We can go deeper on API management. And one of the things that's come up more and more as enterprises are dealing with OpenID Connect is kind of where else we plug into other solutions, such as Okta, Ping, Azure AD, things having to deal with JOT token authentication and authorization are some heavy-duty topics. So the poll's been up for 50-some seconds. I'm going to go ahead and end it and share.
Yep, thank you for that feedback. So I'll say that API management is an optional part of this workshop in the sense that it's changing quite a bit in 2 releases from now. So the July timeframe, we've got a big improvement to our API management capabilities, and so it's great, or excuse me, it's good right now. I shouldn't say great. And if you want to see what's there, it's basically a developer preview. Go ahead and work with it. The documentation is good, or at least I like to think the documentation is good. But based on your responses here, we'll definitely do a deeper API management workshop in the future. So thanks for that feedback. So yeah, that's the overview, and I apologize if I talk too long, but wanted to give you some background as to why we're doing what we're doing in the actual hands-on part. And so if you still don't have a link to UDF, please send a message to all moderators or all hosts, and we will get back to you with a fix for that. And you can come off mute as well if that's not working, and I'm happy to talk real time with you. And we have breakout rooms so that you and I can go into a separate room and talk one-on-one about what you're seeing in the lab or the hands-on portion. You can share your screen potentially if something's not working. And so we're here to help. Got a couple NGINX buddies on the line as well that can help if I'm taken. So thank you all for coming. With that, there's probably going to be a lot of silence in the next hour if you stick around and working on the workshop. But you can have launch your own music or whatever while you're working on this. And again, thank you all for coming.